In a mansion where nothing seems out of place, an ordinary woman defies the silence, unravels buried secrets, and forever changes the fate of a family that never saw her coming. The late afternoon sun bathed the grounds of the Norton mansion with a golden hue, while waiters in impeccable uniforms circulated among the guests with silver trays. In the Brookline neighborhood of Boston, the business elite gathered under white tents that swayed gently in the breeze. It was the first large reception that Robert Norton had hosted since becoming a widower 4 years ago. At 42, Robert was an imposing figure in Boston's real estate scene. Tall, with dark hair slightly graying at the temples, he always maintained a serious, almost inaccessible demeanor. But that afternoon there was a different gleam in his brown eyes. It was the day he would present the Horizon Project, an international venture that could place the Norton Group back at the top of the market. "This is just the beginning of a new era for us," he announced, raising his champagne flute. "After years focused solely on the domestic market, we're ready to expand beyond borders. Horizon will be our landmark in Portugal and subsequently throughout Europe." Applause echoed across the garden. Smiles were exchanged. Murmurs of approval spread among the investors present. The charm of money spoke louder than anything else in that environment. Robert received pats on the back, congratulations, promises of partnerships. For a moment he felt he was finally emerging from the long period of shadows he had lived in since Laura's departure. In a more secluded corner of the immense lawn, 2 identical small figures played without making much noise. Luke and Peter, Robert's twin sons, had escaped from the temporary babysitter's supervision and were now chasing each other, laughing quietly as if sharing a secret. They were the perfect image of Laura, the same green eyes, light brown hair, even the way they furrowed their brows when concentrating. "Look, Pete, I made a paper airplane that flies far," said Luke, showing his paper creation. "I'm going to throw it really high." The boy launched the airplane with all his might, and both watched in wonder as the toy soared, gliding for a few seconds before being caught by a current of air and landing among the high branches of a maple tree. "Oh no," lamented Luke. "It got stuck up there." Peter looked at his brother with determination. "Let's go get it. It's your special airplane." Without hesitation, the two approached the century-old tree that stood near the wall surrounding the property. While the party continued with guests exchanging business cards and promises of millions, the little twins began their climb, determined to recover the paper treasure. Melissa Adams was finishing cleaning the outdoor bathrooms by the pool area when she heard giggles coming from the back of the garden. At 28, she was working that day as a temporary cleaner, hired by the Clean & Co. agency from downtown. It wasn't her permanent job. Actually, she took whatever came up, while trying to save money to finish the education degree she had interrupted 3 years earlier when her mother fell ill. Tall, with olive skin and curly hair tied in an improvised bun, Melissa had deep brown eyes that always seemed to observe beyond what was on the surface. She wore the simple agency uniform, grey pants and shirt with the embroidered logo. She shouldn't have been there in the party area, but something about those childish laughs made her look to the side. That's when she saw it. 2 identical boys trying to climb the tree. One of them was already a few meters above the ground, stretching his arm toward a white object. The other was trying to follow the same path, holding onto branches that seemed too thin to support even a child's weight. "Careful," she shouted, immediately dropping the cleaning products on the ground. But her warning came too late. The branch Luke was leaning on cracked. In a matter of seconds, the boy lost his balance and slipped, hanging only by his right hand from a more resistant branch. Peter, already sensing the danger, tried to reach his brother but was also in a precarious position. "Hold on tight," shouted Melissa as she ran toward the tree. Without thinking twice, she kicked off her shoes and began climbing the trunk, using the bark's protrusions as support. Fear didn't have time to settle in her chest, only urgency. Her fingers automatically found where to grip. Her feet knew where to step. "Miss, he's going to fall," whimpered Peter, with tears beginning to stream down his freckled face. "No, he won't, little one. I'm almost there." Melissa stretched as far as she could, ignoring the tear she felt in her shirt sleeve. She managed to reach Peter first, placing him in a safer position, and then extended her arm to Luke, whose little fingers were already beginning to slip. "Grab my hand, Luke." The boy hesitated for a moment, surprised that this stranger knew his name. In fact, Melissa had just guessed. There was a 50% chance of getting it right. Luke stretched out his free hand, and at the exact moment his fingers released the branch, Melissa grabbed him by the wrist. The sudden movement made her momentarily lose her balance, but she managed to stabilize herself, hugging the boy against her chest. Carefully, she adjusted both children into safer positions and then began the descent, one step at a time, murmuring words of comfort to them both. When she finally stepped onto the grass, Melissa had a boy in each arm, both clinging to her like little koalas. Her clothes were dirty with soil and tree resin. There were leaves stuck in her hair, and a superficial cut marked her forearm, but none of that mattered. The children were safe. It was at that moment that the guests began to notice the commotion. Some pointed, others exclaimed in surprise. A middle-aged woman, who Melissa would later discover was the babysitter hired for the event, ran toward them with an expression of pure terror on her face. But it was another face that captured Melissa's attention. Robert Norton was making his way through the guests with large, determined steps, his face pale and his eyes fixed on his sons. For a moment, Melissa felt a shiver down her spine. She didn't know how the boss would react, if he would blame her for what had happened. "Daddy!" the boys shouted in unison, still not wanting to let go of Melissa. Robert stopped in front of them, breathing with difficulty as if he had run for miles. For a long moment, he just looked at his sons, checking every inch of them for injuries. Then his gaze rose to meet Melissa's. "They're okay," she hurried to say, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just scared." The expression on Robert's face was indescribable, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something Melissa couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger, of that she was certain. "You saved them," he finally said, with a hoarse voice that seemed unused for a long time. "Anyone would have done the same," replied Melissa, feeling her cheeks burn under his intense gaze. "No," Robert slowly shook his head. "Not just anyone." The official babysitter finally reached them, out of breath, and panicking, trying to justify herself amid sobs. Robert raised a hand, silencing her instantly. "We'll talk later," he said in a tone that brooked no discussion. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he extended his arms and took in the two boys who, reluctantly, left Melissa's lap. Immediately they began talking at the same time, telling about the paper airplane, the climb, and how Miss Melissa had climbed the tree like a superhero. While listening to them, Robert didn't take his eyes off Melissa, who now felt out of place, conscious of the dirt on her uniform and the contrast she formed with all that elegance around her. "Mr. Norton," a female voice interrupted the moment. A tall woman, approximately 50 years old, with perfectly arranged blonde hair and an impeccable pantsuit, approached. "The investors are waiting to finalize the presentation." "Tell them we had a small setback, Claire," Robert replied, without taking his eyes off Melissa, "and that we'll resume shortly." The woman whom Melissa would later discover was Claire Norton, Robert's older sister, shot an icy look in the cleaner's direction before walking away with firm steps. "What's your full name?" asked Robert, adjusting his sons in his arms. "Melissa." "Adams, sir?" "Melissa Adams," he repeated, as if testing the sound of the name in his mouth. "Thank you for saving my sons, Melissa Adams. I won't forget this." The sun was already setting on the Boston horizon, casting long shadows across the mansion's garden. Melissa merely nodded, not knowing what to say, not imagining that this seemingly simple moment would forever change the course of her life. And of the Nortons' lives. 3 days had passed since the incident at the party, and Melissa was trying to resume her normal routine. That Wednesday morning, she was in the small apartment she shared with her friend Julie in the Somerville neighborhood, preparing for another day of temporary work. This time, it would be at a company downtown, replacing a cleaner on medical leave. "I still can't believe you climbed a tree in uniform to save a rich guy's kids," commented Julie, biting into a piece of toast while watching Melissa prepare the coffee. "You've always been a bit crazy, but this exceeded all expectations." Melissa smiled, pouring the steaming coffee into 2 simple mugs. What was I supposed to do? Stand there watching the children fall? I didn't even think, Julie. It was instinct. And he didn't even give you a reward? Nothing? These rich people are all the same. Actually, Melissa hesitated, he tried to give me money at the end of the party, but I refused. Julie nearly choked on her toast. You what? Have you completely lost your mind? You could have paid at least 2 months' rent with that money. I don't know how to explain. It didn't seem right. I didn't do it expecting a reward. Melissa's cell phone vibrated on the kitchen table, an unknown number. Normally she wouldn't answer, but something made her slide her finger across the screen. Hello? Melissa Adams. The voice on the other end was male, formal. Yes, speaking. This is Paul Mitchell, assistant to Mr. Robert Norton. He would like to schedule a meeting with you today, if possible. Melissa felt her stomach flip. She exchanged a surprised look with Julie, who raised her eyebrows in a silent question. A meeting? About what? He prefers to discuss it in person. I can send a driver to pick you up at 2 p.m. Melissa hesitated. She had the afternoon shift at the cleaning company. Mr. Mitchell, I have a work commitment this afternoon. Mr. Norton has already spoken with Clean & Co. They agreed to release you for this meeting, without any loss to your daily payment. Melissa blinked, surprised by the efficiency and influence of Robert Norton. She took a deep breath. All right. I'll be waiting at 2 p.m. After hanging up, Julie bombarded her with questions, but Melissa had few answers. What could a man like Robert Norton want with her? She spent the entire morning distracted, thinking about the possibilities. When the car arrived, a black Mercedes with a uniformed driver, her heart was beating erratically. The Norton mansion seemed even more imposing in daylight. Located on a large plot of land, the modern colonial-style construction stood out among the well-maintained gardens. Melissa was led by a middle-aged housekeeper to an intimate living room at the back of the house, very different from the formal environment where the party had taken place. Melissa! The childish voices caught her by surprise. Luke and Peter ran in her direction as soon as she entered the room, hugging her legs with enthusiasm. They wore casual clothes, shorts and t-shirts with superhero prints, and had damp hair as if they had just taken a bath. Our superhero, exclaimed Luke, looking at her with admiration. I told Dad you could fly, added Peter, but he didn't believe me. Melissa laughed, crouching down to be at their height. I can't fly, Peter. I just know how to climb trees very well. The boys haven't stopped talking about you. The deep voice made Melissa look up. Robert Norton was standing in the doorway, observing the scene. He wore dress pants and a long-sleeved shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a more relaxed look than the impeccable suit from the party, but still elegant. There was a tension in his face, lines of worry around his eyes that Melissa hadn't noticed before. Boys, why don't you go play in the garden while I talk with Miss Adams? Sophia is waiting for you outside. The children protested briefly, but obeyed after Robert promised that Melissa wouldn't leave without saying goodbye to them. When they were alone, an uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Please, sit. Down, offered Robert, indicating a sofa. He himself sat in an armchair opposite. Would you like something to drink? Water? Coffee? Water, please. Robert served 2 glasses and handed one to her. Their fingers touched briefly during the exchange, and Melissa felt an inexplicable shiver run down her spine. I'll get straight to the point, Miss Adams. I have a problem, and I believe you might be the solution. Melissa frowned, confused. After what happened at the party, my son's babysitter resigned. In fact, she's the 3rd babysitter to quit in less than 6 months. I'm sorry, murmured Melissa, not knowing what else to say. The boys are challenging since their mother... Robert paused, as if searching for the right words. Since it's been just the 3 of us, they've become very attached to each other and resistant to strangers. Melissa nodded, beginning to understand where this conversation was leading. But with you it was different. They trusted you instantly. Luke and Peter keep asking when Miss Melissa will come back. Robert leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. I would like to hire you as their nanny. The proposal, though half expected after the preamble, still took her by surprise. Melissa shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. "Mr. Norton, I don't have experience as a nanny. I'm a temporary cleaner and—" "You're studying education," he interrupted. "My assistant researched you. You're in your 3rd year, paused for the last 3 years. Melissa felt her face heat up. The idea of having been investigated bothered her. "I plan to go back to college as soon as I can. So I'm saving money and—" "I would pay for your education," Robert interrupted her again. "In addition to the salary, which would be significantly higher than what you currently earn. You could live here, would have weekends off, and I would fully finance your college education." Melissa was speechless. The offer was too tempting to be true. Returning to college was her dream, but in the current circumstances it always seemed too distant. "Why me?" she finally asked. "There must be qualified professionals available." Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that momentarily made him seem vulnerable. "As I said, I've already tried with professionals, 3 of them, all left frustrated because the boys didn't accept them. You saw how they reacted to your presence today. There's something about you, something that inspires their trust." Melissa bit her lip, thoughtful. Part of her wanted to accept immediately. It was a unique opportunity, but another part hesitated. "I would need a few days to think." "I have commitments. My roommate depends on me for the rent." "I understand. How about this? You come work for a week on a trial period. If it doesn't work for either party, we part ways without resentment." Before Melissa could respond, the door to the room opened. An elegant woman entered, looking slightly surprised to see Melissa there. "Oh, Robert, I didn't know you had a visitor. Claire, this is Melissa Adams. Miss Adams, my sister, Claire Norton." Melissa stood up to greet her, but Claire merely nodded briefly in her direction without offering her hand. "The woman from the party," commented Claire, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Very brave, your action." "I'm offering her the position of nanny for the boys," explained Robert. Claire's face hardened momentarily, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, I thought we were going to hire the specialized agency I recommended. The boys didn't adapt to the previous professionals." "And does Miss Adams have experience with children?" asked Claire, addressing Melissa for the first time. "I study education," replied Melissa, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Or rather, I did. I had to pause temporarily." "Fascinating," commented Claire with feigned interest. She turned to her brother. "Robert, can we talk privately for a moment? It's about that tax issue we discussed yesterday." Robert hesitated but ended up agreeing. "Excuse me, Miss Adams, I'll be back in a moment." When left alone, Melissa walked around the room, observing the photographs on the walls. There were several of Robert with the twins, some older ones, showing the couple. She presumed the woman with the radiant smile was Laura, the deceased wife. There were also photos of the extended family, including Claire and an older couple who must have been Robert's parents. One photograph in particular caught her attention. It showed the mansion decades ago with the family gathered in front. There was something familiar about that image, something she couldn't identify. "The house hasn't changed much since then," commented Robert, returning to the room. "My father was attached to tradition. He kept the original structure, only modernized. The interior." Melissa moved away from the photograph, embarrassed at being caught snooping. "Sorry for the interruption," he continued. "Where were we?" "On the trial period proposal," answered Melissa. "I think I can try for a week." Robert's face lit up with a smile, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. The transformation was surprising. Suddenly he looked years younger, more accessible. "Great. When can you start?" "Next Monday would be possible. I need to organize a few things beforehand." "Perfect. My assistant will contact you to settle the contractual details." Before they could continue, they heard the sound of hurried footsteps, and the twins burst into the room, followed by a young woman in uniform who looked exhausted. "Is Miss Melissa going to stay with us?" asked Luke, hopeful. Melissa exchanged a look with Robert before answering, crouching down again to be at the children's height. "Yes, I am for a few days. We'll see if you can stand me." The boys celebrated, jumping and clapping. Melissa couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. Something about those children deeply touched her heart. As she said goodbye at the mansion's door, Melissa noticed Claire observing her from a window on the upper floor, her face partially hidden by a curtain. There was something disturbing about that look, something that made Melissa shudder despite the warmth of the afternoon. On the way back to her apartment, while the driver drove in silence through Boston's tree-lined streets, Melissa couldn't help but think that she was about to enter a completely different world from her own. What awaited her at the Norton mansion? Would it just be a temporary job, or the beginning of something that would change her life forever? What she didn't know was that, while she was thinking about this, Claire Norton was in her office, at the mansion, typing the name Adams into an old digital family archive, initiating a search that would bring to light secrets long buried. Melissa's first week at the Norton mansion passed like a whirlwind. Her life, previously divided between temporary jobs and the small apartment in Somerville, now revolved around the twins Luke and Peter, who had welcomed her as if they had known her forever. The room assigned to her on the upper floor of the house was larger than her entire old apartment, with a king-size bed, private bathroom, and a stunning view of the gardens. "They've never woken up so excited for breakfast," commented Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for over 20 years, while serving coffee to Melissa in the kitchen. It was the 6th day of work, and the boys were still asleep. "Mr. Norton is impressed." Melissa smiled, blowing on the hot drink. "They're wonderful children, Mrs. Thompson. They just needed consistent attention." After Mrs. Laura passed during childbirth, this house became a place of shadows, whispered the housekeeper, looking to the sides as if afraid of being heard. Mr. Norton buried himself in work. Miss Claire took on many responsibilities with the boys, but, well, she doesn't have a way with children. "I noticed she's quite formal," commented Melissa, carefully choosing her words. "Formal is a polite way of putting it," replied Mrs. Thompson with a contained laugh. "But don't misunderstand me. She kept the family together all these years. She's Mr. Norton's right hand in business and in raising the boys." Melissa nodded, storing that information. In the few days she had spent at the mansion, she had barely seen Claire, who seemed to purposely avoid her. The few interactions they had were brief and loaded with poorly disguised tension. "Mrs. Thompson," began Melissa, hesitant, "you've worked here for a long time. Did you know everyone in the family?" The housekeeper raised an eyebrow. "Yes, dear. Why?" "It's just that I saw an old photograph in the living room. The house looked exactly as it is today, but the people—" "Ah, must be the photo from old Mr. Andrew Norton's 50th birthday, Robert's father. It was taken about 25 years ago, shortly before he—" Mrs. Thompson paused, as if she had said something she shouldn't have. "Before he—" encouraged Melissa. "Before he fell ill," the housekeeper completed quickly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to finish organizing lunch." Melissa realized something was being omitted but didn't insist. The mystery surrounding the Norton family seemed to grow each day, and a strange feeling was beginning to grow inside her, as if she were rediscovering something, not discovering it for the first time. The sound of small footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Luke and Peter entered the kitchen in pajamas, their hair disheveled and eyes still sleepy. "Miss Melissa!" they exclaimed in unison, running to hug her. "Good morning, my little ones." She hugged them, feeling a wave of affection. In less than a week, those children already occupied a huge space in her heart. "What do you want to do today?" "Dad said he's going to take us to the park in the late afternoon," answered Luke, excited. "Yeah, and he said you're coming too," completed Peter, climbing onto her lap. Melissa was surprised. Robert hadn't mentioned anything about a park outing. On previous days he arrived late, when the boys were already asleep, and left early even before breakfast. The only contact they had was through short messages asking about his son's well-being. "That's great," she smiled, disguising her surprise. "But first, let's have breakfast and get ready. Then we have math class, remember?" The boys made identical faces, drawing a laugh from Melissa. One of the changes she had introduced was a routine of light and playful studies in the morning. At first there was resistance, but her pedagogical approach soon won over the little ones. The morning passed peacefully, between math lessons with games, story reading, and activities in the garden. After lunch, While the twins took their daily, that Melissa took the opportunity to explore the house a bit more. Robert had given permission for her to move freely, except for his office and Claire's room when she was at the mansion. The place that most intrigued Melissa was the attic. Mrs. Thompson had mentioned that family albums and old objects were stored there. Driven by growing curiosity, Melissa climbed the stairs leading to the top floor and found the attic door unlocked. The space was spacious, illuminated by narrow windows, and surprisingly organized. There were shelves with labeled boxes, old furniture covered with white sheets, and trunks aligned against one of the walls. Melissa walked among the objects, touching them lightly, feeling the weight of family history they carried. A box marked Photos 1990-2000 caught her attention. She sat on the dusty floor and opened it carefully. Inside, she found albums organized by year. She began to flip through them, observing the younger faces of people she now knew and others she would never know. In one of the albums, a specific photograph made her heart race. It showed the mansion's garden during what appeared to be a party. In the corner of the image, almost imperceptible, was a young woman in uniform serving drinks. Her face was partially visible, but Melissa would recognize those features anywhere. "Mom?" she whispered, incredulous. Eleanor Adams, her mother, had worked at the Norton mansion. How was that possible? Why had she never mentioned it? The questions swirled in her mind as she examined the image more closely. There was no doubt. It was her mother, probably at the same age Melissa was now. So absorbed was she in the discovery that she didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. When the attic door creaked, Melissa looked up, startled. Claire Norton was standing at the entrance, her face a mask of surprise that quickly transformed into something harder. "What are you doing here?" asked Claire, her voice sharp as ice. Melissa quickly closed the album, feeling like a child caught doing something wrong. "I'm sorry, I was just exploring. Mr. Norton said I could move around the house." "The attic is not technically part of the house," replied Claire, approaching. Her eyes fell on the closed album in Melissa's lap. "What were you looking at?" "Just old photographs. I found it interesting to see the family's history." Claire extended her hand, a silent command, for Melissa to hand over the album. Reluctantly, she obeyed. Claire opened it exactly to the page Melissa had been observing, as if she knew precisely what to look for. "You seem fascinated by this photo in particular," she commented, her tone apparently casual, but her eyes were fixed on Melissa's face, studying every reaction. Melissa hesitated. Should she reveal that she had recognized her mother? Something in her instinct screamed for her to keep this information to herself. "I found it interesting to see what the parties were like back then." Claire observed her for a long moment, her penetrating eyes seeming to see through the lie. Finally, she closed the album with a sharp movement. "Well, curiosity satisfied, I suggest you return to your duties with the boys. They shouldn't be left alone for too long." "They're sleeping," replied Melissa, standing up and brushing the dust from her clothes. "But you're right. It's almost time for them to wake up." When she passed by Claire toward the door, she felt the woman's cold hand hold her arm. "Melissa," said Claire, her voice now softer, almost maternal, "you seem to be a good person. But remember, you were hired to take care of the boys, not to investigate this family's past. Some doors are better kept closed." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed. Melissa nodded briefly and went down the stairs with her heart racing. Something was very wrong in that house, and somehow her mother was part of this mystery. When she returned to the twins' room, she found them still asleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, observing the serene little faces, so similar to their father's, but with subtle features that must have come from their mother. In just a week, she already loved them as if they were her own. The idea that there was a dark secret connecting her family to theirs deeply disturbed her. The sound of her cell phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a message from Robert confirming the park outing at 5 p.m. Melissa responded with a simple "confirmed" and put the device away. She needed to focus on the present, on the boys, on the job for which she had been hired. but the image of her mother in that old photograph wouldn't leave her mind. In the late afternoon, Robert arrived earlier than usual. Melissa heard his deep voice downstairs talking to someone, probably Mrs. Thompson. Shortly after, he came up and appeared at the door of the boys' room, where the three of them were organizing toys. "Dad!" The twins ran to hug him, and Robert bent down to receive them, a genuine smile lighting up his face. It was impressive how he transformed near his sons. The serious and formal man gave way to a caring and attentive father. Melissa observed the interaction with a discreet smile, appreciating the evident bond between them. "Ready for the park?" asked Robert, adjusting Peter's shirt that was half untucked. "Yes," they responded excitedly. "And you, Melissa?" Robert raised his gaze to her, his brown eyes meeting hers. "I hope you don't mind accompanying us." The boys insisted. "Of course." "Not," she replied. "It will be a pleasure." Boston Commons was relatively quiet that Thursday afternoon. Robert parked his car, a luxury SUV more discreet than the official Mercedes, and the four of them walked along the tree-lined paths. The twins ran ahead, occasionally stopping to point out something interesting. "They're different," commented Robert, walking beside Melissa. "Happier, more secure. You did that in a week." Melissa felt her face warm with the compliment. "They just needed consistent and loving attention. They're amazing children, Mr. Norton." "Please, call me Robert," he requested. "After saving my sons and transforming their lives, I think we're past formality." She nodded, smiling shyly. There was something in the way he looked at her that disconcerted her, not in a bad way, but as if he were trying to decipher a puzzle. "Melissa," he continued, slowing his pace to increase the distance between them and the boys, "I know the trial week isn't over yet, but I'd like to formalize your permanent hiring. The boys adore you, and clearly you've been doing an exceptional job." "I would very much like to continue," she responded honestly. "I've become too attached to them." Robert smiled, seeming genuinely relieved. "Great. My lawyer will prepare. So the contract will include payment for your college education, as agreed." Melissa felt a pang of guilt. Should she mention the photograph she had found, ask about her mother? But how could she do that without seeming to be prying into the family's past, or worse, that there was a hidden motive for accepting the job? "Robert," she began hesitantly, "there's something that—" "Dad! Miss Melissa, look what we found!" shouted Luke, interrupting the moment. The twins were waving excitedly near a small pond where ducks swam peacefully. The conversation would have to wait. Melissa smiled and followed Robert to the children, keeping her questions for another moment. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with ice cream, games, and lots of laughter. Observing Robert with his sons, Melissa saw a completely different man from the serious and reserved businessman everyone knew. There in the park, he was just a loving father trying to make up for lost time. When they returned to the mansion, it was already early evening. The boys were exhausted but happy. Melissa helped them with their bath and dinner, while Robert took some work calls. Afterward, the four gathered in the living room for a board game, another tradition Melissa had initiated during the week. "Checkmate," exclaimed Peter, moving a piece erroneously on the child-modified chessboard. "Actually, that's from the chess game, not this one," explained Melissa gently. "But you won anyway." The boys laughed, and even Robert seemed relaxed, sitting on the carpet with his legs crossed, far from the rigid posture of the executive. It was such a domestic scene, so natural, that for a moment Melissa forgot all her concerns. When she finally put the twins to bed, it was already past 9. She returned to the living room to organize the games, and found Robert still there, looking thoughtfully out the window, a glass of whiskey in hand. "They fell asleep quickly," commented Melissa, beginning to put away the game pieces. "You have a gift with them," replied Robert, turning to face her, "something none of the previous nannies managed." Melissa smiled, feeling valued. "Thank you." "No, I thank you." He approached, placing the glass on the coffee table. "You can't imagine how difficult these years have been. After Laura passed and I was lost, I immersed myself in work to avoid dealing with the pain. The boys suffered because of that. The vulnerability in his voice deeply touched Melissa. Without thinking, she extended her hand and touched his arm in a gesture of comfort. They are strong and loving children. That's a reflection of the father they have. Robert looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. There was an intensity in his eyes that made Melissa's stomach jump. "Melissa, he began, taking a step in her direction. The sound of heels in the hallway broke the moment. Claire entered the room, stopping abruptly upon seeing the two so close. Her gaze oscillated between them, calculating, evaluating. "Robert, can we talk about tomorrow's meeting? The Chinese investors confirmed their presence, and we need to adjust some points of the presentation." "Of course," he replied, moving away from Melissa. "Give me a few minutes." Claire nodded stiffly and left the room, but not before shooting a hard look at Melissa. "I should go," said Melissa, finishing putting away the game pieces. "The boys have swimming lessons early tomorrow." "Yes, of course," agreed Robert, suddenly formal again. "Good night, Melissa, and thank you for today." "Good night," she replied, heading to the door. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Melissa couldn't stop thinking about how everything was becoming complicated. What had started as a temporary job was now transforming into something much more complex. There were the twins, for whom she already nurtured a deep love. There was Robert, whose presence affected her in a way she didn't want to admit. And there was the mystery of her mother, Eleanor, somehow connected to the dark past of the Norton family. Lying in her bed, Melissa made a decision. The next day, she would call Mrs. Evans, a close friend of her mother who lived in Newton in the Boston metropolitan area. If anyone could shed light on Eleanor's past at the Norton mansion, it would be her. Melissa needed answers before she became even more involved with that family, who, she suspected, harbored secrets that could change her life forever. The small house of Mrs. Evans was located in the historic district of Newton, about 20 kilometers from Boston. Melissa had managed to get time off on Saturday morning, telling Robert she needed to resolve personal matters. The twins were disappointed, but were appeased with the promise of a movie in the afternoon. The taxi left Melissa at the entrance of a narrow street with cobblestones, typical of New England colonial architecture, colorful houses with wooden windows lined both sides, and the smell of homemade bread lingered in the air. Number 53, Mrs. Evans's residence, was painted in a faded blue tone with pots of ferns hanging on the porch. "Melissa! What a nice surprise!" Mrs. Evans exclaimed as she opened the door, her wrinkled face lighting up with a genuine smile. At 72, she maintained an enviable energy and keen eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Mrs. Evans," Melissa hugged her affectionately. "I'm sorry for showing up like this without proper notice." "Nonsense, child. Your call yesterday was notice enough. Come in. I just made a cornbread that's delicious." The house was simple but welcoming. Old photographs adorned the walls, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the aroma of the bread fresh out of the oven. Melissa sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Evans served coffee in old porcelain cups. "So," began the elderly woman, sitting across from Melissa, "you're working at the Norton house." It wasn't a question, and Mrs. Evans's tone carried a weight that Melissa couldn't fully interpret. "How do you know?" "Boston may be big, but news travels, especially when it involves a family like the Nortons and a girl who climbs trees to save children." Mrs. Evans gave a half smile. "Besides, you called yesterday asking about your mother and the Norton family. It wasn't hard to put the pieces together." Melissa nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "I found a photograph in the mansion's attic. My mother was there wearing a maid's uniform at a party. I never knew she worked for them." Mrs. Evans was silent for a moment, as if weighing her words. "Your mother worked at the Norton mansion for almost 3 years, between 1993 and 1996. It was before you were born. Why did she never tell me?" "Some experiences we prefer to forget, my child." Mrs. Evans sighed deeply. "Your mother had strong reasons to never bring up the subject." A shiver ran down Melissa's spine. "What reasons?" Mrs. Evans slowly got up and walked to an old wooden trunk in the corner of the room. From there she removed a dusty shoebox. Returning to the table, She placed it in front of Melissa. "Your mother gave me this to keep shortly before she passed away. She said that one day you might need it, but she hoped that day would never come." With trembling fingers, Melissa opened the box. Inside were some yellowed documents, old newspaper clippings, and on top, a sealed envelope with her name written, in her mother's familiar handwriting. "Read the letter first," instructed Mrs. Evans. "Then we can talk about the rest." Melissa carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the pages, feeling a lump in her throat as she recognized her mother's handwriting. "Dear Melissa," she began to read in a low voice, "if you are reading this, it means that somehow the past has found its way to you. I hope you forgive me for never having told this story, but it was to protect you and to protect myself from memories I always tried to bury." The letter continued, revealing a dark story that made Melissa's stomach churn. Her mother, Eleanor Adams, had begun working at the Norton mansion as a domestic servant in 1993. Andrew Norton, the family patriarch and father of Robert and Claire, was known for his violent temperament and for harassing female employees. At first, Eleanor managed to avoid his advances, but over time the harassment became more aggressive. In December 1995, the letter continued, "I was trapped in the mansion during a storm. The rest of the family was traveling. Andrew cornered me in the laundry room. When I tried to resist, he became violent." Tears streamed down Melissa's face as she read her mother's words, describing the abuse suffered at the hands of the Norton patriarch. In the following weeks, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. Desperate, she confronted Andrew, who denied everything and threatened her. That's when Claire entered the story. The young woman of 25, recently graduated in business administration and already active in the family business, learned of the situation. Instead of supporting Eleanor, she organized a plan to silence her. She offered her money to leave and never mention the incident again. When Eleanor refused, demanding that Andrew take responsibility, Claire used her influence to forge documents and falsely accuse her of theft. "With no options, I accepted the money and signed a confidentiality agreement," wrote Eleanor. "I left Boston and went to the countryside, where you were born 6 months later. I never told anyone who your biological father was, not even you. How could I explain that you were the fruit of such a violent act? How could I say that your father was a powerful man who treated me like garbage and then discarded me?" Melissa let the paper fall, covering her face with her hands. The revelation was devastating. Andrew Norton, the grandfather of the twins she now cared for with such love, was her biological father. Robert and Claire were her half-siblings. Luke and Peter were her nephews. "She never wanted you to know," said Mrs. Evans softly, holding Melissa's hand across the table. "She only wrote this letter in case something happened and you, somehow, became involved with the Norton family." "It's as if fate had planned everything," murmured Melissa, wiping away tears. "Of all the houses in Boston, I ended up in theirs. Coincidence or not, you need to decide what to do with this information now." Melissa picked up the letter and continued reading the final paragraphs. "If by some chance of fate this truth has reached you, I want you to know that I never regretted having you as a daughter. You were the light that emerged from the darkness, my greatest love and joy. Don't carry hatred in your heart for what happened to me. Live your life with the dignity and kindness I always tried to teach you. If you find the Nortons, use your own judgment about whether or not to reveal the truth. I only ask that you protect yourself, as I tried to protect you throughout my life. With eternal love, your mother, Eleanor." Silence dominated the kitchen for long minutes after Melissa finished reading. Mrs. Evans waited patiently, respecting the whirlwind of emotions she knew was passing through the young woman. "There are more things in the box," the elderly woman finally said. "Documents that your mother kept as evidence in case one day she needed them. The agreement she signed, newspaper clippings from the time when the Nortons were constantly in the news, even a DNA test she secretly conducted using a sample she got from Andrew." Melissa slowly went through the documents, absorbing the reality that each paper confirmed. Her entire life had been built on a secret, a lie by omission told with the best of intentions. "What do I do now, Mrs. Evans?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. How do I go back to that house knowing all this? How do I look at Robert, at the boys? Only you can decide that, my child, but remember, this truth belongs to you now. You owe nothing to anyone. You don't need to reveal anything if you don't want to, or you can choose to tell everything. The power is in your hands. Melissa nodded slowly, putting the documents back in the box. I need to think. I need to process all this. Stay here today if you want. The guest room is always ready. I can't, replied Melissa, checking the clock. I promised the boys I'd take them to the movies this afternoon. I can't disappoint them. Mrs. Evans smiled sadly. You have your mother's heart, always thinking of others first. As she said goodbye, Melissa hugged the elderly woman tightly. Thank you for keeping all this time, for respecting her wish. Your mother was my best friend. I promised to take care of you, and that includes giving you the truths when you were ready for them. With the box firmly held against her chest, Melissa left Mrs. Evans's house. The taxi was waiting to take her back to Boston, back to the Norton mansion, back to a reality that was now completely transformed. During the entire journey, her mind worked frantically. Should she tell Robert? Would he have knowledge of what his father had done? And Claire, her half-sister who had deliberately silenced and threatened her mother, how to face her knowing the truth? The taxi stopped in front of the mansion exactly at noon. Melissa paid for the ride and stood for a moment observing the imposing construction that now she knew was part of her genetic heritage. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the gates, the box hidden in her bag. Melissa! The twins ran to her. As soon as she entered, hugging her legs with enthusiasm. We missed you. Looking at those smiling little faces, Melissa felt a tightness in her chest. They were her blood family, her nephews, completely innocent in this whole story. I missed you too, little ones, she replied, bending down to hug them. Ready for the movies? Yes, they answered in unison. Dad said he's coming too. Melissa felt her heart speed up. She hadn't expected Robert to accompany them. She wasn't prepared to face him yet, not with the truth so recent and raw in her mind. Melissa, welcome back. Robert's deep voice sounded behind her. Turning slowly, Melissa found him standing in the doorway of the living room, casual in jeans and a polo shirt, so different from the formal executive she had initially met. There was a warm smile on his face, and his eyes, the same eyes she saw in the mirror every morning, she now realized with a shock, sparkled with genuine affection. Thank you, she managed to reply, struggling to maintain her composure. I hope you don't mind that I took a little longer. Not at all. Did you resolve your personal matters? The innocent question now seemed loaded with hidden meanings. Yes, she answered simply. I'm ready to go to the movies if that's still the plan. Of course it is. The boys haven't talked about anything else all morning. The trip to the mall and the movie theater passed like a feverish dream for Melissa, while the twins laughed. At the animated film and Robert smiled at seeing them happy, she felt like an external observer, as if watching a play where she was forced to interpret a role for which she wasn't prepared. During the session, sitting in the dimness between Robert and Peter, she observed from the corner of her eye the profile of the man she now knew to be her half-brother. The straight nose, the shape of the chin. How had she not noticed the similarities before? Perhaps because she had never looked for them, never had reason to suspect. Is everything all right? Whispered Robert at one point, noticing her gaze. You seem distant. Just tired, she lied. It was a full morning. He nodded, returning his attention to the film, but his hand briefly rested on hers on the armrest of the chair, a casual gesture of comfort that now seemed loaded with cruel irony. What would he think if he knew the truth? That she was the daughter of the man he had called father, the fruit of an act of violence, that she now cared for his nephews, completely unaware of this kinship until a few hours ago. When they returned to the mansion in the late afternoon, Melissa felt emotionally exhausted. While the twins ran to show Mrs. Thompson the toys they had received after the movie, Robert invited Melissa for coffee on the back porch. I've been thinking, he began, as the housekeeper served 2 steaming cups. The boys have been so happy since you arrived. The whole house seems different, more alive. Melissa felt her throat tighten. I'm happy to hear that. I know it's only been 2 weeks since you've been with us, but you've already become indispensable." Robert paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "Melissa, I'm not good with feelings. Since Laura passed, I closed myself off. I focused only on work, on business. I let Claire take on many responsibilities with the boys that should have been mine." "You did the best you could under difficult circumstances," she replied automatically, trying to ignore the mention of Claire, which now evoked an anger she had never felt before. "Maybe, but it wasn't enough." He looked her directly in the eyes. "What I'm trying to say in a clumsy way is that your presence here has brought something that was missing, not just for the boys, but for me too." Melissa's heart raced. The direction of that conversation terrified her. Was he suggesting something beyond the professional relationship? Before she could respond, Claire's cutting voice interrupted the moment. "Ah, there you are," she said, coming out through the porch door. She wore an impeccable grey pantsuit, despite it being Saturday. "Robert, we need to talk about the audit. The board moved the meeting to Monday." Robert sighed, visibly irritated by the interruption. "Claire, it's Saturday afternoon. Business doesn't respect weekends, you know that." She smiled coldly at Melissa. "If you'll excuse us, Miss Adams, family matters." The words, "family matters," now sounded like a slap. Melissa stood up, grateful for the exit. "Of course, I'll check on the boys." As she walked away, she felt Claire's gaze burning into her back. Did she suspect? Had she recognized in her traits of Eleanor, or worse, of Andrew? In the boys' room, Melissa found them playing happily with their new toys. Watching them, a resolution began to form in her mind. Regardless of her biological connection to the Norton family, regardless of the dark past, she had a responsibility to Luke and Peter. They loved her, trusted her. She couldn't simply disappear from their lives because of secrets buried decades ago. But she also couldn't continue living in that house, coexisting daily with Robert and Claire, carrying the weight of that truth alone. Something needed to be done. That night, after the twins were asleep, Melissa locked herself in her room and re-examined each document from Mrs. Evans's box. She reread her mother's letter, analyzed the confidentiality agreement signed by Eleanor, studied the newspaper clippings that showed the Norton family at the height of its power and influence in the 90s. A plan began to form. It wasn't about revenge. Her mother had made it clear she didn't want her to carry hatred. It was about justice, about truth, about clearing Eleanor's name that had been unjustly stained. Tomorrow would be Sunday, her day off. She would visit Mrs. Evans again, but this time with a specific purpose. She needed more information, more evidence, and she needed advice on how to proceed without harming the innocent in this story, especially Luke and Peter. As she put the documents back in the box, her cell phone vibrated with a message. It was from Robert. "Sorry about Claire's interruption today. Can we continue our conversation tomorrow? There's something important I'd like to tell you." Melissa stared at the screen for long minutes, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. "Finally," she replied, "tomorrow is my day off. We can talk on Monday." The response came almost instantly. "Of course. Rest well. The boys and I will miss you." Melissa turned off her phone and placed it on the bedside table. She lay down on the bed, looking at the ornate ceiling of the room she now knew belonged to her own family's house, a family that had never recognized her, that had silenced her mother, that had hidden her existence. Sleep was slow to come, and when it finally did, it brought restless dreams populated by faces from the past and the present, all connected by invisible threads of blood and secrets that, she sensed, would soon come to light, forever changing the destiny of all involved. Monday arrived with a fine rain that fogged the windows of the Norton mansion. Melissa had spent her Sunday off again with Mrs. Evans, gathering more information and strengthening her determination. Now, while helping the twins dress for school, she tried to maintain her composure, even with the whirlwind of emotions consuming her inside. "Miss Melissa, are you sad?" asked Peter, his green eyes fixed on her face as she buttoned his uniform shirt. The question caught her off guard. "Why do you think that, little one?" "You didn't sing this morning," replied Luke, who was tying his sneakers sitting on the edge of the bed. "You always sing when you help us get dressed." Melissa felt her heart tighten. The children were so perceptive, so sensitive to changes in her mood. "I'm not sad," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just thoughtful. Adults sometimes get like that." "Is it because of Dad?" insisted Peter. "Did you two fight?" "Of course not. Why would you think that?" The twins exchanged identical looks, that silent communication that only they understood. It was Luke who answered. "Dad said he wanted to tell you something important yesterday, but you weren't here. He spent the whole afternoon looking out the window." Melissa felt her cheeks heat up. What did Robert want to tell her? Was it about work, about the boys, or something more personal? Part of her feared finding out. "Your father and I will talk today," she assured, adjusting Peter's collar. "Now let's go. The driver must already be waiting to take you to school." After leaving the twins in the car with the driver, Melissa returned to the mansion. She knew Robert would be at home. He rarely left for the office before 9 on Mondays. It was the moment she had both dreaded and longed for since Saturday. She found him in the living room, reviewing some documents while having coffee. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile. "Melissa, good morning. The boys already left?" "Yes, I just put them in the car." Robert nodded, putting the papers aside. "Please, sit down. I'd like to talk before I go to the office." Melissa obeyed, sitting in the armchair opposite his, her hands firmly intertwined in her lap to hide their trembling. "First," he began, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for my sons. In just 2 weeks, you've transformed this house." "It's my job," she replied automatically, "and they're wonderful children." Robert smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that left her alert. "What I want to say goes beyond the professional." "Melissa." He paused as if searching for the right words. Melissa felt her heart speed up, fearing the direction of the conversation. "I'm not good at this," he continued, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "Since Laura, I closed my heart. I thought it would be easier that way, safer. But then you appeared, saved my sons, entered our lives, and something changed. Robert, please let me finish." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I know it may seem hasty. We've known each other for a short time. But there's something between us, something I can't ignore. I feel alive again when I'm near." "You—" Melissa closed her eyes for a moment, Mrs. Evans's revelation echoing in her mind. They were half-siblings. The man in front of her, confessing feelings that went beyond friendship, shared her blood without knowing it. "We can't," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. "If it's because of work, the children, we can find an arrangement. I know it's complicated, but—" "It's not that." Melissa stood up abruptly, unable to continue sitting. "There's something you need to know. Something about me. About my family." Robert frowned, confused. What could be so serious? Melissa took a deep breath, gathering courage. It was now or never. "My mother, Eleanor Adams, worked in this house in the 90s. Robert's face registered surprise, but not recognition. "Really? I must have been a teenager at the time. I don't remember her." "She worked mainly when you were at boarding school," continued Melissa, recalling the details Mrs. Evans had shared. "But your father, Andrew, was here, and your sister, Claire, too." The mention of his father made something change in Robert's look. A shadow crossed his face. "What about my father?" It was the moment of truth. Melissa felt her legs tremble but stood firm. "Your father abused my mother, and I am the result of that." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at her, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if time had frozen in that elegant room of the Norton mansion. "That's impossible," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "My father was a difficult man, but he never—" "I have proof," interrupted Melissa, hating herself for having to do this, but knowing it was necessary. "Letters, documents, even a DNA test that my mother secretly obtained. Your sister Claire knew everything. It was she who orchestrated the silence agreement, who threatened my mother, who forced her to leave the city with a lie about theft. Robert stood up abruptly, walking to the window. His rigid back, tense shoulders, everything about him radiated denial. "Why are you telling me this now? What do you want? Money?" The accusation hit her like a slap. "I don't want anything from you or your family. I'm saying this because I need you to understand why there can't be anything between us beyond a professional relationship. We're half-siblings, Robert." He turned slowly, his face pale. "This is absurd. It's a made-up story. My father had flaws, but he was—" "A rapist," completed a cold voice from the door. Both turned, surprised. Claire was standing at the entrance to the room, impeccable in her black pantsuit, her face a mask of calculated indifference. "Claire!" Robert seemed even more shocked by his sister's appearance. "Are you hurt?" "I heard enough." She entered the room, closing the door behind her, her cold eyes fixed on Melissa. "So you're Eleanor's daughter. I should have realized sooner. You have the same look." Melissa felt a shiver run down her spine. The confirmation, so casual, so devoid of emotion, caught her off guard. "You knew?" asked Robert, incredulous. "You knew all this and never told me." "To protect the family," replied Claire calmly. "To protect you, the business, our father's legacy. What did you expect me to do? Let a maid destroy everything we built?" "She was a victim," exclaimed Melissa, anger finally breaking her composure. "My mother was raped and then silenced, and you helped cover it all up." Claire shrugged, a studiedly casual gesture. "I did what had to be done. I gave her a generous amount." She accepted the agreement. "Under threat," countered Melissa, "after you falsely accused her of theft." Robert looked from one to the other as if watching a particularly violent tennis match. "Is this true, Claire? You falsified accusations?" "I did what was necessary," repeated Claire, her tone hardening. "Dad was sick, the company was in crisis, we couldn't afford a scandal." "So it's true," murmured Robert, his face a mask of horror. "Everything she said is true." A heavy silence dominated the room. Melissa observed the two siblings, her half-siblings, processing the reality that had just been exposed. Claire, always controlled, seemed unshakable. Robert, on the other hand, was visibly crumbling with each second. "I need you to tell me one thing," he finally said, turning to Claire. "Did Laura know about this? Is that why she—" "Laura knew nothing," interrupted Claire abruptly. "Your wife died in childbirth, Robert. Stop looking for ghosts where they don't exist." Melissa realized there was more to this story than she knew. Something about Laura, Robert's deceased wife, connected to this secret somehow. "What else have you hidden from me, Claire?" Robert's voice was now dangerously low. "What else have you done to protect the family?" Claire sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "This conversation isn't leading us anywhere. What matters now is how we'll deal with the current situation." She turned to Melissa, her calculating gaze. "What exactly do you want? Recognition? Money? A part of the inheritance?" "I don't want anything material," replied Melissa firmly. "I want my mother's name cleared. I want the truth to be known, at least within this family." "Impossible," dismissed Claire. "There are legal agreements, confidentiality, not to mention the damage to the company's reputation, to our father's memory." "Your mother deserves justice," said Robert softly, ignoring Claire. His eyes, so similar to Melissa's, were full of genuine pain. "And you are my sister." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings. Melissa felt tears burn her eyes. "This is ridiculous," intervened Claire. "Even if it's biologically true, she's not part of this family. She never will be." "It's not up to you to decide that," retorted Robert, his voice finding strength. "If what she says is true, and by your behavior I'm convinced it is, then she has as much right to the Norton name as we do." Claire laughed, a cold sound without humor. "You're being naive, as always. She appears out of nowhere, with a convenient story, gains your trust, gets close to the boys, and now this. Don't you see what's happening?" "What are you insinuating?" asked Melissa, indignation growing. "I'm stating that you planned all this from the beginning," replied Claire. "The coincidence of working at the party, the heroism in saving my nephews, gaining their trust and Robert's, all calculated to eventually reveal your kinship and claim what you think is due to you." "That's absurd," protested Melissa. I didn't even know my mother had worked here until I found that photograph in the attic. A convenient story, retorted Claire, without proof. The evidence is with Mrs. Evans, said Melissa. All the documents, my mother's letter, everything. Easily. Forged, dismissed Claire. Robert, who had been observing the exchange in silence, finally intervened. Enough, Claire. Your reaction only confirms her story. If it were a lie, you would be as surprised as I am. Claire looked at him coldly. You've always been naive, little brother. That's why I had to take the reins of the family when Dad fell ill. That's why I've always protected you and the boys. Protected me or controlled me? Questioned Robert, a new understanding dawning in his gaze. How many decisions have you made for me, justifying them as protection? The tension between the two was palpable. Melissa felt like an intruder witnessing a long-overdue family confrontation. But before Claire could respond, Robert's cell phone rang. Hello? His face changed instantly. Yes, this is he. What? When? I'll be there immediately. He hung up, his face as pale as paper. The boys, there was an accident with the school car. They're in the hospital. Melissa's world seemed to stop. Accident? Are they alive? Replied Robert quickly. But injured. I need to go now. I'm coming with you, said Melissa automatically, her heart racing with panic. No, intervened Claire. You've already caused enough damage to this family. I'm their aunt. I'll go with Robert. She's their aunt too, replied Robert, grabbing the car keys. And they want her around. Melissa is coming with me. You can meet us there later. The expression on Claire's face was one of pure fury, but Robert was already leaving, with Melissa right behind. In the car, as Robert drove at speed through Boston traffic, the silence between them was loaded with 1,000 unasked questions, 1,000 newly revealed truths. How serious? Melissa finally asked, her voice trembling. I don't know details. The school car skidded on the wet road and hit a pole. Several students were injured. Melissa closed her eyes, silently praying for the safety of the children who, in such a short time, had become so important to her. Children who, she now knew, were her blood. St. Clair Hospital, one of the most modern in Boston, was on alert when they arrived. Several anxious parents crowded the reception, all trying to get information about their children. Robert, using his influence, gained immediate access. Luke and Peter Norton, he said to the receptionist. I'm their father. They were led to the pediatric wing where a doctor met them. Mr. Norton, the twins are stable. Luke suffered a mild concussion and some abrasions. Peter had his right arm fractured and needed a few stitches on his forehead. Both are conscious and asking for their parents. Can I see them? Asked Robert, his voice choked with emotion. Of course, this way. Melissa hesitated, uncertain if she should accompany them. Robert noticed and extended his hand to her. Come, they'll want to see you too. The room was spacious and well lit, with 2 child-sized beds side by side. The twins, looking small and vulnerable in their hospital gowns, lit up upon seeing their father and Melissa. Dad, Miss Melissa, exclaimed Luke, trying to sit up. Peter, with his arm in a cast and a bandage on his forehead, just smiled weakly. I told you they would come, he murmured to his brother. Melissa felt tears stream down her face as she approached the beds. All the confusion, all the revelations of the day, seemed insignificant in the face of the relief of seeing the boys, alive and conscious. I was so worried, she said, stroking Luke's hair, then gently holding Peter's free hand. The van skidded, explained Luke, his large eyes still frightened. It made a really loud noise. But we were brave, completed Peter. We didn't cry. You were very brave, confirmed Robert, his voice choked with emotion. He was sitting on the edge of Peter's bed, holding his other hand. Melissa observed the scene, her heart divided between relief and pain. These boys were her family, her blood. And the man in front of her who had confessed feelings for her just minutes ago was her half-brother. How would they proceed from here? The door to the room opened, and Claire entered, her face tense. Her eyes scanned the room, noting Melissa's proximity to her nephews, Robert's hand holding Peter's, the family unit they formed even amid the crisis. "Aunt Claire?" exclaimed Luke. "Look, I got stitches." Claire forced a smile, approaching. "I see you're being well taken care of." There was something in her tone, a calculated coldness, that made Melissa shiver. The woman in front of her had conspired to silence her mother, had buried the truth for decades. And now, from the looks she was casting, Melissa knew she would not easily accept the changes this revelation would bring. "The doctor said they can go home tomorrow," informed Robert. "Just for observation tonight." "Good," replied Claire. "I've already spoken with our lawyers about the accident. The school will be held responsible." "That can wait," said Robert firmly. "What's important is that they're well." "Is Miss Melissa going to stay with us?" asked Peter, his little voice weak with fatigue. Before Melissa could respond, Claire intervened. "Miss Adams has other commitments, I'm sure. I'll stay with you tonight." "I want Miss Melissa," insisted Peter, his eyes filling with tears. Melissa felt her heart tighten. How could she leave them now? How could she simply walk out of their lives after everything she had discovered? "I'll stay," she decided, looking directly at Claire, a silent challenge in her eyes. "If Robert allows, of course." "Of course," he replied immediately. "The boys need you. We all need you." Claire observed them, the barely contained fury in her cold eyes. "We need to talk, Robert, in private." "Later," he replied, without taking his eyes off his sons. "Now my priority is Luke and Peter." The tension in the room was palpable, but the twins, tired and medicated, seemed oblivious to the adult drama unfolding. Soon they fell asleep, exhausted by the ordeal. Melissa sat in an armchair between the two beds, watching the sleeping little faces. Robert remained standing by the window, looking at the rainy exterior. Claire had left to resolve bureaucratic issues, but Melissa suspected she was making calls, planning her next move. "What do we do now?" asked Melissa softly, breaking the silence. Robert turned to her, his tired face marked by new lines of concern. "I don't know. Everything has changed in a matter of hours. You're my sister, my father's daughter, my son's aunt. Half-sister," she corrected gently. "Still family." He paused, looking at his sleeping sons. "They love you, you know. In 2 weeks, you've become more important to them than Claire in 4 years. "I love them too," replied Melissa sincerely. "Since the first day." "Maybe it's the blood," reflected Robert. "Some invisible connection we didn't even know existed." Melissa nodded, understanding what he meant. She had always felt an inexplicable affinity with the twins, something that went beyond natural sympathy with children. "Claire won't accept this easily," she warned. "She hid the truth for decades. She won't simply allow me to enter the family now." "Claire doesn't decide for me anymore," replied Robert, a new determination in his voice. "For years, I let her control many aspects of my life, the business, even how my sons were raised, always in the name of protecting the family. But what happened to your mother is that changes everything." Melissa felt a spark of hope grow in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that regardless of how we deal with the past, you're part of this family now, and I want you to stay, not just as the boys' nanny, but as my sister." The words, spoken with such sincerity, deeply touched Melissa. Silent tears streamed down her face. All the resentment, all the anger she had felt upon discovering the truth seemed less important now. What mattered were the boys sleeping peacefully, and the man in front of her, offering her a place in the family that by right was also hers. "And if Claire tries to push me away?" she asked, the concern still present. Robert's face hardened. "She can't, not anymore. I've made my decision." The rain continued to fall outside, washing the city, as if nature reflected the emotional cleansing occurring inside that hospital room. Old secrets were coming to light, ancient lies were being exposed, but from the ashes of the past, something new was beginning to be born, a reconstructed family, based on truth, however painful it might be. Melissa looked at her sleeping nephews, then at Robert, her half-brother. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt she was exactly where she should be. She was home. 3 months had passed since the day the truths came to light in the hospital. Winter was giving way to spring in Boston, and the cherry trees in the garden of the Norton mansion were timidly blossoming, announcing new times. Melissa observed the transformation of nature through the library window, where she was organizing children's books for the reading session she would have with the twins later. Much had changed in those 90 days. The mansion, once a place of heavy silences and shadows of the past, now resonated with childish laughter and open conversations. The twins, completely recovered from the accident, were happier and more secure than ever. And Melissa, who had entered that house as a simple nanny, now occupied a completely different place in the Norton family. "I thought you'd be here," said Robert, entering the library with a folder in hand. The documents arrived. Melissa smiled, sitting in the leather armchair near the unlit fireplace. "Finally." Robert joined her, opening the folder on the coffee table. Inside were the papers that formalized what both already knew: the legal recognition of Melissa as Andrew Norton's daughter with all the rights that implied. "It's done," he said, running his fingers over the notary's seal. "Officially, you're Melissa Adams Norton now, if you want to use the surname, of course." Melissa took the documents, feeling the weight of the moment. "I'm still processing all this. It's strange to have a new name at 28. "It's your right," replied Robert simply. "Something that should have been yours since birth." The first days after the revelation in the hospital had been tumultuous. Claire, as expected, had fought with all her might against Melissa's integration into the family. She had threatened lawsuits, tried to discredit the evidence presented by Mrs. Evans, and even suggested that the DNA test had been forged. But Robert, for the first time in years, had stood firm against his sister. He had demanded a new DNA test, which confirmed the kinship. He had hired investigators who discovered more details about Eleanor's case, including witnesses who corroborated the version of systematic harassment by Andrew. And finally, he had confronted Claire with evidence that she had not only silenced Eleanor, but also diverted company funds for her own benefit over the years. "Where's Claire now?" asked Melissa, returning the documents to the folder. "London." "As far as I know," replied Robert, a trace of sadness in his voice. "After the board removed her from the directorship, she decided she could no longer stay in Boston. She said the city had become too small for both of us." "You miss her," observed Melissa. "It wasn't a question." "It's complicated," admitted Robert. "She was my sister, my partner, my confidant my entire life. What she did was unforgivable, but it doesn't erase decades of shared history." Melissa nodded, understanding. Despite everything Claire had done against her mother, against herself, she understood the bond Robert still felt. Family ties were complex, rarely reducible to simple categories of right and wrong. "The boys asked about her yesterday," commented Melissa. "Peter wanted to know if Aunt Claire would come for their birthday." "What did you answer?" "The truth, that she's traveling, and probably won't be able to come. They seem to accept it well." Robert smiled sadly. "Children are resilient, and they have you now." The sound of small footsteps interrupted the conversation. Luke and Peter entered the library running, their faces flushed with excitement. "Aunt." "Melissa, Uncle Paul said we can see the treehouse now," exclaimed Luke, jumping with excitement. Paul Mitchell, formerly Robert's personal assistant, now acted as a sort of butler and general helper at the mansion. In recent months, he had been supervising the construction of an elaborate treehouse for the twins in the same maple tree where everything had begun. "They finished it?" asked Melissa, smiling at the nephew's excitement. "I thought it would. Only be ready next week." "The team worked double time," explained Peter. Come see, come see." Melissa exchanged a knowing look with Robert before standing up. "Let's go then, I can't miss this." The four headed to the garden, where Paul was waiting for them near the tree. The treehouse was impressive, a well-planned structure with real windows, a small porch, and even a pulley system to lift toys. Everything built with reinforced safety, an absolute priority after the accident that had almost occurred months ago. "It looks amazing," praised Melissa, observing every detail. "And safe," added Paul. We tested everything 3 times. The stairs have anti-slip protection, the railings are reinforced, and there are safety nets around the entire structure. Can we go up now? Asked Luke, already with one foot on the first step of the ladder. Of course, replied Robert, but carefully, please. The boys climbed quickly, with the natural agility of children. Melissa followed them, while Robert and Paul remained below talking about the final details of the construction. Inside the treehouse, Luke and Peter were already exploring every corner, opening built-in drawers and testing the cushioned benches. By the windows, it's the best treehouse in the world, declared Peter, looking through the window that gave a view of the entire property. It was Dad's idea, Luke told Melissa. He said he wanted to transform the place of the accident into a place of joy. Melissa smiled, touched by Robert's sensitivity. It was exactly the kind of gesture that demonstrated how he had changed in recent months. More present, more aware of his son's emotional needs, more open to creating new positive memories. Look, Aunt Melissa, called Peter, pointing to a small wooden plaque nailed to the wall. Read it for us. Melissa approached and read the inscription carved into the wood. Home of the 3 Musketeers, Luke, Peter, and Melissa. Unexpected tears came to her eyes. It was a simple but profound recognition of the place she occupied in the children's lives. It was our idea, explained Luke proudly. Dad asked what name we wanted to give the treehouse, and we decided it has to have your name too, because you're part of our team. I loved it, replied Melissa, hugging them both. It's the greatest honor I've ever received. They stayed in the treehouse for almost an hour, planning all the activities they would do there. Picnics, story readings, bird watching. When they finally came down, they found Robert sitting on a garden bench, observing them with a tranquil smile. Paul said lunch will be served in 20 minutes, he informed. Mrs. Thompson prepared that lasagna you all love. Yay! The twins ran toward the house, eager for the promised meal. Melissa sat beside Robert on the bench, both watching the children move away. They love you very much, he commented. Sometimes I think they love you more than me. Impossible, replied Melissa, smiling. You're their hero. I'm just the fun aunt who lets them eat dessert before dinner once in a while. Robert laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months. Thank you for staying, Melissa. After everything that happened, no one would have blamed you if you had left. And missed the chance to know my nephews, to recover part of the family I never knew I had. She shook her head. I never seriously thought about leaving. It was true. Despite the initial shock, the pain of discovering the circumstances of her birth, Melissa had found in the Norton mansion something she had sought all her life, a sense of belonging, of family. The twins had won her over from the first day, and Robert, after the initial moment of denial, had become the brother she never had. Of course, the process hadn't been easy. Besides Claire's attempts to discredit her, there were legal questions, the reaction of the press when the case partially came to light, the curious looks from people who frequented the Norton social circle, but they faced everything together, as a family. Have you decided what you're going to do about the inheritance? Asked Robert, referring to the part of Andrew's assets that now legally belonged to Melissa. I'm still thinking, she replied, but I'm inclined to use it to create a foundation in my mother's name, something focused on supporting women victims of violence, perhaps. It seems appropriate. Robert nodded, approving. I think she would be proud. I hope so. Melissa looked at the blue spring sky, thinking about how Eleanor would react to everything that had happened. You know, sometimes I wonder if she somehow planned all this. In the letter, she said she hoped the day I discovered the truth would never come, but at the same time, she kept all the evidence, all the documents, as if deep down she knew I would eventually find my way here. Maybe that's exactly it, reflected Robert. Parents always want to protect their children, but they also want them to know the truth eventually. The sound of Mrs. Thompson's voice calling them for lunch interrupted the moment of reflection. Walking side by side toward the house, Melissa thought about how her life had completely changed in a few months. From temporary cleaner to recognized member of the Norton family, from fatherless daughter to heiress of a business empire. More. Importantly, from a lonely woman carrying the weight of her mother's loss, to a loving aunt with 2 nephews who brightened her days. At lunch, seated around the large dining table, the 4 formed a picture of domestic harmony that would have seemed impossible months ago. The twins excitedly recounted all the toys they would take to the treehouse, while Robert and Melissa exchanged knowing smiles. "Aunt Melissa," called Peter between one fork and another, "are you really going back to college next week?" "Yes, I am," she confirmed, "but only during the mornings when you're at school. I'll be back every afternoon." "And on weekends?" asked Luke, concerned. "I'll be here, of course. I wouldn't miss our Saturday movies and Sunday park days for anything, in this world." The boys smiled, reassured. Robert observed the interaction with visible approval. "Actually," he intervened, "I have a surprise related to that. Melissa, remember you mentioned it would be difficult to commute from college to here every day?" Melissa nodded, curious. "Well, I solved that problem." Robert took from his pocket a small keychain with the Volkswagen logo. "It's for you, a new Jetta, to facilitate your transportation. It's parked in the garage." Melissa widened her eyes, surprised. "Robert, you didn't have to—" "Of course I did," he replied simply. "You're going to graduate, you're going to start teaching, you'll need independence. Besides, you'll also be able to take the boys on outings without depending on a driver." "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "This means a lot." "Less than you deserve," replied Robert, his gaze loaded with meaning. "Much less." After lunch, while the twins took their habitual nap, Melissa took the opportunity to visit a special place in the back of the garden. Under an old cherry tree, a small marble plaque had been installed weeks earlier. It wasn't a tomb. Eleanor's body rested in the Newton Cemetery, but a memorial, a recognition. Eleanor Adams, 1967-2020. Mother, friend, woman of courage. Her truth finally found light. Melissa knelt before the plaque, gently touching the letters engraved in the cold stone. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "Your name is cleared, your story is known, and I found a family I never knew I had." A gentle breeze swayed the branches of the cherry tree, causing some flowers to fall on the memorial. Melissa smiled, interpreting the moment as a sign. Her mother would be at peace now. She stood up and walked slowly back to the mansion, observing how the place had transformed in a few months. The gardens, once immaculately arranged but lifeless, now displayed colorful flower beds where the twins helped plant flowers on weekends. The pool, once rarely used, was now the scene of swimming lessons and water games. The house itself seemed to breathe better, the windows always open, letting in light and fresh air. On the porch, she found Robert on the phone, probably dealing with business. He waved to her, indicating he would finish soon. Melissa sat in the rocking chair watching the sunset that was beginning to paint the sky in orange tones. When Robert finally ended the call and joined her, he seemed satisfied. "Good news," he announced. "The board unanimously approved your foundation. The Eleanor Adams Foundation will receive full support from the Norton Group." Melissa smiled, moved. "That's wonderful. It will be a new beginning for so many women." "A new beginning," repeated Robert thoughtfully. "Seems like we're having many of those lately." "And we'll have many more," replied Melissa with conviction. "Life is made of that, isn't it? Of endings that become beginnings, of doors that close so others can open." Robert nodded, looking at the Boston horizon that stretched beyond the walls of the property. "You know what impresses me most in all this? How something as terrible as what happened to your mother could decades later result in something positive. You came to this house, saved my sons, brought light to our lives. From a tragedy, a new family was born." "Life has these ironies," agreed Melissa. "I think my mother would understand. She always said that even in the worst situations we can find seeds of hope." The sound of small, sleepy footsteps interrupted the conversation. Luke and Peter appeared at the porch door, still in pajamas, their hair disheveled from the nap. "Aunt Melissa," called Luke, rubbing his eyes, "you promised you'd read that dragon story today. And you promised we'd inaugurate the treehouse with a special snack," completed Peter. Melissa smiled, standing up. And I'll keep both promises. How about if you get dressed first, then we read the dragon story, and then prepare the snack? To take to the treehouse. The boys agreed enthusiastically, running back inside. Robert observed the scene with a serene smile. They're lucky to have you, he commented. The luck is mine, replied Melissa sincerely. I found a family when I least expected it. As she followed her nephews into the mansion, Melissa thought about how destiny operates in mysterious ways. The house that had harbored so much suffering for her mother had become her home, her refuge. The people who had denied her existence now recognized her as a legitimate part of the family. The secret that should have remained buried forever had brought upon coming to light a healing that no one had imagined possible. And above all, the tree, that maple that had almost caused a tragedy, now housed the Three Musketeers' house, a perfect symbol of how danger had transformed into joy, fear into adventure, the past into future. The Norton mansion, once a place of shadows and silences, now echoed with childish laughter and honest conversations. The family, once fragmented by secrets, was now rebuilding itself on foundations of truth and acceptance. Melissa knew the path would not always be easy. There would still be pain to process, truths to confront, adjustments to make. Claire might one day return, bringing new challenges. The outside world would not always understand or accept the peculiar story of the family. The twins would grow up and ask difficult questions about their past. But they would face all this together, as a family built not only by blood, ties, but by daily choices of love, respect, and honesty. While helping Luke choose clothes and Peter tie his shoelaces, Melissa felt a deep certainty. This was her place. Here, among these boys who called her aunt with so much affection, in this house that finally opened its doors to the light, beside the brother who had embraced the truth with courage and dignity. Eleanor would have been proud, not only of the outcome of the story, but mainly of the path taken, a path of dignity, of seeking the truth, of forgiveness without forgetting justice. "We're ready, Aunt Melissa," announced the twins in unison, interrupting her thoughts. "Then let's go," she replied, picking up the book about dragons she had promised to read. "Our adventure is just beginning." And as they headed to the reading room, followed by Robert, who carried a tray with snacks for later, Melissa knew it was true. The real adventure, that of building a family on the ruins of the past, of transforming pain into love, of honoring her mother's memory by living with dignity and joy, was just beginning. The sun was slowly setting over Boston, casting a final golden ray through the windows of the Norton mansion. Inside, 4 people united by blood and by choice were beginning another chapter of their shared story. A story of new beginnings, of second chances, of love that transcends the wounds of the past. A story that,